As we start out, let me lay some groundwork for our discussion tonight. And Father Russ and I will have a conversation. He's very easy to talk with, not just to, but with. And it's our best hope that we can think through some of the issues that have affected all of us regarding worship, specifically the Catholic Mass, during these challenging and troubled times. And there probably aren't enough negative superlatives to describe this. So based on the mission and the vision of Faith Connect, by the way, thank you. And it really isn't an afterthought, to the Newhoff School of Ministry, as well as Dr. Jody Hunt, for that lovely introduction. I hope that our conversation can encourage a vision that is only beginning to be shaped, a vision that is going to have to originate in our religious imaginations, which isn't fantasy. But as you are all aware, and sometimes we get reminded of this several times a day, there's a positive response finally to the ongoing pandemic. And this positive response is going to challenge our parishes and our people and our faith. A positive response accelerating hope. And the hope is in the form of a vaccination, which will protect us from the coronavirus. So we cannot lose hope, because after nearly a year of closing worship spaces, lack of community gatherings, deep anxiety, cultural change, you all are aware of the laundry list that we could really put forward as far as the challenges that we've had: personal adaptation and very real loss, as Father Russ mentioned, loss of life, loss of family, loss of friends. Hope is a virtue that we can start to revisit and renew. And this hope will directly impact our relationship with God. And I'd like you to pause for a minute and just think briefly about being rooted in something, a community, faith, traditions. Rootedness gives us a way of being able to face the world. And being Christian is one way of being rooted. Being Catholic Christian is one way of being rooted. And being rooted makes it easier to live in the world. So while we're on the subject of hope, I think we will need to retrieve another virtue, which may or may not come easily. Hope is a virtue that we can retrieve, but the other virtue is called trust. And we'll need to engage with trust, especially if we're fully committed, and you all know this, to fully active and conscious participation in the celebration of the Mass. Now, as I say that, churches are open. Our worship spaces are not fully open because we socially distance and wear masks. But our presumption is that this will change. Our hope and our faith is grounded in this kind of change. So, besides using something called practical theology for our conversation, and practical theology is examining a topic through the lens of theology and experience, Father Russ and I will do some informed social analysis. And I'm not using big words to impress anyone, but social analysis is really a technique that everybody uses, and you don't realize this. You systematically examine a problem, a social problem, from one end to the other, and it has the goal of prompting change in the current situation. So social analysis amounts to something. Although Father Russ and I are not social scientists, he is a pastor, he's a gifted homilist, he's a lover of liturgy and prayer, And I'm not a social analysis or a social scientist, excuse me, either. I am a liturgist, a lector, a musician, and a fairly experienced generalist when it comes to enacting worship. We both know that the time is ripe for looking back and naming what we've lived in the past year, and then trying to move through this and draw some pretty good conclusions about online masses and prayer and gaining some hope for the future. So hope is growing so that we can once again see our churches fully open. And we're making that distinction, fully open for the celebration of the Eucharist. So we're going to take a measured look at how to shape people and parishes, and frankly ourselves, for a return to in-person celebration of Sunday as Catholics. We do believe that this will happen, and it's not too soon for the hope and the trust. So housekeeping, there are 2 PDFs available for you, and we hope you'll enjoy them. You might be interested in checking out, it looks like a lot of words, but it is a fully edited, annotated, accessible vocabulary list, and there's only 7 definitions, but this will help you weed through some things that we don't talk about all the time, but we need to know about, like grace and spiritual communion and sacramental theology. So we think that they're worth having, and we offer those to you, as well as 7 slides that will keep you interested, we hope, and that might be the basis for an ongoing discussion for all of you. We also hope for some time to respond to questions that you might have. So you might want to make a note or two so that you can remember your question. You'll be able to type it in, and we will do the best we can as far as the time we have to respond to you. So, good people, thank you for carving out the time to be with us for this conversation. Let's get right to the topic. Some observations about where we've been with online worship, some considerations for re-engaging Catholics with sufficient trust so that they will return to online worship when we're fully open, and even some considerations for priests, deacons, parish staffs, liturgical ministers, volunteers, and yes, even a bishop or 2. We hope that there's a couple that are tuning in who would enjoy our presentation. So, Father Russ, let's begin by having you share some thoughts about online masses. Did your experience play out that people are actually worshiping? Okay, we've been doing this for a year.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Hughes. My take on online masses is, well, first of all, we just need to say they were never intended to draw out this long. When we started online masses, it was intended to be a stopgap, and I think all of us envisioned that online masses would be our normal for a month or 2 while this pandemic passed, and it's becoming more normal. I hate the term new normal because it's not normal. We Christians were designed to be in communion with each other, to get together and worship together. So the online masses, when they started, were very simple. I remember my first online mass was for the school kids at our parish, and I just propped my iPhone up on the crucifix on the altar. I did the entire mass right there in front of my iPhone at the altar, and people liked it, but they liked it because it was their connection to the church initially. Some parishes and certainly many dioceses have got production crews to improve the quality of online masses, and that's great. But again, they don't answer the question of how do we gather. They don't. While we can see the priest celebrate the Eucharist, consecrate the body and blood, um, it's we don't get to fully participate, as you mentioned ahead of time. And I think people are really tiring of online masses, even if they don't realize it. I had a parishioner mention to me a week or so ago that I'm just not getting much out of the online masses. And I asked her the question, well, how are you going to mass? Are you uh, sitting down with your bathrobe and your fuzzy slippers with a cup of coffee and watching mass on TV or on your computer? And uh, if is that how you would come to church if you were doing mass in person? When we first started this, I would get pictures from parents of the school kids showing me their kids kneeling in front of the computer or in front of the TV and doing the gestures of the mass. And I thought, that's great, that's how it's supposed to be. But we are so tired of doing things online, whether it be mass or school or work or Zoom meetings, and but we're really suffering from digital fatigue, and that enters into the mass. So for the online masses to be more effective, they have to be well produced. They have to have good homilies. There has to be a pleasing environment. In the days of when you can just prop up an iPhone and do mass, that's not going to attract anybody. That's I don't want to say it's repulsive because it's the mass, but people aren't gonna watch that. They're not going to engage in that at all. So what we need to do is we need to figure out, while we're doing online masses, how do we make them better? And then how do we wean people off of online masses? Because as Dr. Hughes mentioned, most of our parishes are open, even though if they're open at reduced capacity. Um, some parishes are requiring reservations to make sure they don't overcrowd, but I think most are sort of self-regulating. And so we need to get people back into the churches. Um, and you mentioned the term fully open. We're not fully open, but we are open. So we need to start making people comfortable with coming back. Um, we we worry that, I don't want to say people are getting comfortable with not coming to church, but I fear that that is becoming normalized, not coming to church, and so we need to figure out, how do we keep people interested? How do we feed them spiritually? Because ultimately, that's what happens when you are present physically in the celebration of the Eucharist, is you are spiritually fed.
Well,
I'll turn this back over to you. I don't want to dominate.
well, let me jump in right here and hope that you'll agree with me when I can characterize the celebration of the Eucharist as an optimal experience. Um, oh, good, he agreed with me. Um, uh, Television doesn't provide, or a monitor or live streaming doesn't provide an optimal experience of a Catholic ritual. Um, as you indicated in the beginning, the church didn't imagine or anticipate such a worldwide crisis. But if we fast forward to what was imagined, if you'll bear with me, I don't think it hurts us to remind ourselves what the Second Vatican Council, which is simply an article of history for those who weren't around at that time, and that's perfectly understandable. But the Second Vatican Council indicated in the very first document, the Constitution on the Sacred Liturgy, that Pastors, no pressure, must therefore realize that when the liturgy is celebrated, something more is required than the mere observance of the laws governing valid and licit celebration. It is also their duty, and all pastors know this, it is also their duty to ensure that the faithful take part, fully aware of what they are doing, actively engaged in the rite, and enriched by its effects. I don't have any strong feelings that streaming video has actually accomplished this, and I know that times are unprecedentedly different, but I don't think that live streaming can really come close to the optimal experience. Let's put it that way. So uh, I think the general instruction of the Roman Missal, the directions for how to say Mass, how to do Mass, it says that the Mass is the action of Christ himself, represented by the priest, in which the church gathered takes part. And the church gathered taking part is really difficult to do in the living room or wherever the monitor is propped up or in front of a computer. So I think it's we'll have to change, and perhaps one really positive, and I hope you'll agree, one positive outcome of online masses is, and I'll run back to what you mentioned briefly. Um, uh, there are masses that have happened, and mostly across dioceses in the United States, that have some kind of technology at their cathedral, or at a church that has an abundance of updated technology. Some of those online masses have been powerful. Some of them have been pre-recorded so that the length could be edited. Many of them have had really good music. That engages people, and I think that online streaming has probably done some evangelization that we otherwise could not have accounted for. So people watching and saying, I want what those Catholics have. I want that. So I'm going to recommend that the dioceses keep one Mass to broadcast consistently, and there are dioceses who've been doing this for years, but that they take their very best Mass and just consistently broadcast it for shut-ins, people who can't get out, people who are hospitalized, people in nursing homes, regardless of the pandemic. If there was one wonderful, beautiful Mass, a worthy celebration in every single diocese, I think that would be a blessing of the current technology and online streaming. So, best case scenario, what do you think pastors, priests, bishops, what do you think needs to happen when oh, happy day, the bishop gives the go ahead for churches to be fully open? And again, there's the virtue of hope, and it will happen. We just don't know when. So what do you think, Father Russ?
Well, I think what we learn from the online Mass experience is if we take the best of the online Masses, which in our diocese I think would be probably the Mass that's broadcast on Sunday mornings, either from the cathedral or from another church. We've been pretty good about visiting parishes so people can see their own parish on TV right now. But one common thread with all these masses has been that the homilies have been very good, that the music has been very good, that the environment, as I mentioned earlier, has been good. And that's just something as simple as good lighting, nice floral arrangements, bright, um, and they flow well. Now, one of the reasons they flow well is because we have that editing ability, probably. Although I think most of them are not significantly edited. But we need to figure out how to bring that back into the church when we go live, and that means music ministers need to step up. It means that pastors, all priests need to step up, and deacons, and give a little extra effort in their homilies, and plan them out to make sure everything runs smoothly, to prepare more for Mass than we have. It's, I think, as a pastor, sometimes I get in the mode where I know where everything is, I know where everything is supposed to be, and you just go on autopilot, and we can't do that. When I've done the diocesan online masses, I carefully planned out what was going to happen next, and I gave a lot of thought to what was going to happen next. When you do an online mass, you have a clock right in front of you, and so you're conscious of how long your homily's taking, and things like that. So we need to bring those things into the church. The music, especially, I think, is the masses that I've seen online. The music is beautiful, it's well done, and it's simple. So we need to be able to engage, or have the congregation engage in the participation of the music. Um, uh, Dr. Hughes, you and I talked earlier about how difficult the Gloria is to sing sometimes, because
Yes.
when musicians are trying to put that to music, it doesn't have a real great meter to it, and it's hard to
Right.
put that to music. But
The Song of
in a
the
mass
Angels is a
setting,
real is a real challenge, and it seems as if once people learn a glory to God, they don't let go of it, and or there might be an unwillingness to change. I I gently reminded Father Russ in an earlier discussion that, and he knows this, that there are many settings and fresh, newer, more accessible, simple settings of the glory to God. Uh, Really, one has been used consistently for the diocesan mass in the Diocese of Dallas, but there are others out there. Maybe that's a challenge for the music minister. I spoke with two music directors this week, and how are you doing? How's it going? And of course, they all miss their choirs, but most of all, they both echoed the fact that they aren't as busy as they want to be. They aren't using their gifts and their skill set. And uh, even when we're fully open, we may have to go gently with choirs and aerosol and sprays and all that sort of thing that vocalization has attached to it. But back to what you're saying, the the glory to God might be a great place to introduce or to start to look. Music directors, musicians, even if you're only responsible for one mass, look for a setting. Talk to your brothers and sisters. Play through things. They're online. They're on YouTube. Uh, Take it away, Father Russ. What's going on in your parish? And I'll put my soapbox away.
well, in our parish, we are open. Our attendance is not great. It's probably around 25 or 30% what we were pre-pandemic. Um, the By the way, many thanks to people who do online giving and mail in their offerings, because we wouldn't survive without that. So uh, thanks for that. But coming to church, people are worried about coming to church because they don't want to put themselves in that environment where they're in close quarters with other people. We are very careful. All the parishes are very careful about social distancing. I think virtually every parish has every other pew closed off. There are instructions at the beginning of Mass and signage about how to receive communion and so on. But I'd like to remind people that most churches, certainly in our parish, the entire church is disinfected after each Mass. And I'm not talking about just wiping down the door handles. We fog the church after every Mass in preparation for the next Mass. It's the environment that you're coming into in your parish is much safer than going to the grocery store or going to Walmart or any department store. I mean, your pastors are very concerned about your safety, and pastors have worked with families through this pandemic and seen the harm that can be done to families through death and illness and not being able to visit with their loved ones in the hospital and so on. And I think because of that, we are much more conscious about your safety when you come into the church, and you need to uh, uh, talk to people that have been attending Mass and get their feedback from that. It's while no place is totally safe, no place you are totally immune. Um, Church is probably one of the safer places you can go. Certainly safer than taking your family out to a restaurant for dinner, even with social distancing.
Well, thank you. That that needed to be said, and I'm glad you put it that way. It's I've also noticed that, and maybe this is a subject for a conversation that a parish staff or parish volunteers need to start having, even if they have a Zoom meeting. Um, uh, the conversation would center around how we welcome people in the 5 parishes that I've visited recently. Uh, to a person, the hospitality ministers seem to be so grateful for that you are there, that it's really tough to characterize any other kind of enthusiasm. They are on point. They, of course, they are masked there, but with smaller groups, of course, they will point out where you need to sit. But the enthusiasm, they open the doors for you. Some parishes do that at Easter time. Some in Texas, I think, in the Southwest, there's a lot of unique opportunities to do something that costs nothing, which is to open the door for a family and say welcome. Um, uh, Hospitality is something that I not only value, but it's really part of. I'd like to think it's part of my lifestyle. Um, but certainly the people who are now in our parishes that are not fully open, who are welcoming people, it's a different kind of welcoming. It's uniquely enthusiastic, and there is a kindness and a generosity that I would not typically see in the past on the 21st Sunday in ordinary time. I mean, it's easy to get into the habit of doing things one way. But people are just, there's one group of liturgical ministers that I really would hold up in every single parish. If they're there and they're helping, they're so happy to welcome you. So just a little shout out to the hospitality ministers. And when we need more liturgical ministries, as you say, let's roll out the best that we have to show. Um, it also might evangelize or continue to evangelize the folks who have seen us on television and kind of wondered what's going on with those Catholics. Maybe I want to do that. Maybe I want to be that way. Maybe I want to pray that way. So even though it might not seem healthy or as convenient, I think that I appreciate the fact that you can encourage Catholics to come to church. We're doing the best we can. Come in and just a taste and see might help them remember what they've missed. Old habits die hard. Go ahead.
And if people are worried about the crowd on Sunday masses, have them come to a daily mass. Invite them to daily mass where there aren't as many people, and it's sort of, does that meet your Sunday obligation going to daily mass? Well, no, but it probably gets you closer than an online mass. And have them stick their toe in the water if that's if that's an appropriate thing. One other thing we need to do is when the time comes, I think bishops need to be bold enough to say, all right, your dispensation from attending mass it is over, but they need to do it at the right time and in a way to assure people that it is indeed safe to come. And right now, people aren't receiving the Eucharist, and they're praying this prayer of spiritual, an act of spiritual communion, which is a beautiful prayer in itself. The one we use here typically is the one that Saint Alphonsus Liguori wrote a few hundred years ago. But if you read it carefully, if you really pray it, it's a sorrowful prayer in not being able to actually receive the body and blood of Christ. And I'm afraid that sometimes it becomes a rote prayer, like the Lord's Prayer or a Hail Mary, that we can pray without thinking about it. But it really is a prayer of deep sorrow in what we are not able to participate in.
I agree. And it's
I think, go ahead.
The church considers all acts of spiritual communion to be beneficial. That's the Western Latin Rite Roman Catholic word that I could find in research. Beneficial. It's beneficial to pray an act of spiritual communion. I think people don't realize, or for variety, here's the sidebar. Saint Padre Pia, Saint Teresa of Avila, Saint John Vianney, Saint Jose Maria Escriva, they all put forward a form that's pretty accessible of an act of spiritual communion. I think it's also really important to remember that act of spiritual communion is not sacramental. Holy Communion. It's not a sacrament. The prayer, the act of spiritual communion, the prayer is a sacramental. And a sacramental, as you are all well aware, it is and can be an action or an object like blessed palms, an action like the sign of the cross. A sacramental can be a prayer that indicates or reminds us that God is found in other places besides reposed in a tabernacle in the church. Now, simply put, I think everybody needs to be reminded that a sacramental is a wonderful object, prayer, or action that reminds us and provides a moment that we could have a personal graced encounter with Christ. And sacramentals are beautiful. I have been thinking that in many ways, the online Mass has functioned as a sacramental, because if you watch the online Mass, you don't have the opportunity to receive the sacrament. You don't have the opportunity to truly celebrate the Eucharist and to receive Jesus Christ's body, blood, soul, and divinity. So I think we've done the best that we could under the circumstances, and I'm pretty sure that the Catholic Church never envisioned that this pandemic and online masses and all that would certainly last as long as it's actually lasted and still goes on.
You know, Dr. Hughes, you mentioned St. John Vianney, and
Yeah.
he once said, when we feel the love of God growing cold, let us make a spiritual communion. And I think that's what we're doing with online masses, is we're trying to keep the love of God from growing cold. But we're trying to keep that warm. But what our hearts want is, they want it to be on fire. And we get that when we meet with our brothers and sisters in the Mass and other places too. One of the things we need to pay attention to is not just bringing the community together to celebrate Mass, but bringing the community together and having fellowship and you know, maybe a picnic or a barbecue or a movie night or whatever it takes to get people together and reconnect, not just as participants in the Mass, but to reconnect as brothers and sisters in Christ, reconnect our families.
Well, those are all occasions for grace. I'm so glad that you brought up community, because I believe that we've all missed community, even if you characterized yourself as, I go to Sunday Mass, but I don't volunteer for committees. There's still a sense of community before and after Mass. There's still what I like to characterize as the ministry of the parking lot, where there's somebody out there to greet you, particularly in the Southwest, where the weather is so much more temperate, and this is really possible. And it's one way to build community, and I know that you know a lot of other ways, but I think community means showing up for people, and that's, we haven't had a chance to do that in a very long time, and it means to us as Catholics being part of a multitude, or being part of a group that's defined by the common object of our love. And of course, that common object is the Catholic Mass, the celebration of the Eucharist. And that isn't my lofty thought, actually, it's St. Augustine's. But to be honest and forthright, we have to place a really high value on building or rebuilding community, whether it's youth or young adults, or and maybe we can't do everything all at once, but that would be a big margin note for any group that's going to try and figure out how to regather and how to attract people. And let's just talk a couple minutes about attraction, because do you think it has value if we go back to some great signage in front of the church? We're open here to the mass times. We're be safe. Come celebrate with us. How would you handle that without being marketing being a big budget item?
Well, I think that it's something we could work together on marketing. It's work together. We've done it as a diocese. We've done it as a church in the U.S. with other marketing schemes. We've done it with the Bishop's Appeal, with the One Faith, One Future, was something we did diocese wide. But other things we've done to bring people in evangelization is things like the light is on for you, to bring people into reconciliation during Lent,
Right.
or come home for Christmas. And I think we're probably getting close to the time where we need to do a concerted effort on a campaign to bring people back into the church. So if that sounds very commercialized or marketing, yes, it is. Evangelization is marketing. It's just we have an awesome product to market.
Yeah, we
Um,
do.
so yeah, we need to be thinking about those things. And I think that if we work together on this as a group, I would love to have all my parishioners back here at St. Elizabeth. But more than that, I would like them to go to church somewhere. And so um, I think probably we need to cast a broad, a wide net uh, when we get back into the marketing. And certainly there's things we can do in the parishes on parish websites and Facebook pages and using flock notes and so on to get the word out to the people. But I think a coordinated effort is ultimately what's gonna make a difference.
Okay, that helps. It helps to think about what needs to be done. Uh, Parishes and people and volunteers, ask your constituents, ask your neighbors, uh, uh, ask them to go to church with you. How many times does that happen? But post-pandemic, what needs to be done? Ask those questions at staff meetings. What do pastors need to do? What do parish staffs need to do? What kind of support for re-entry and re-energizing and welcoming is needed? And marketing is not a bad word. It's real, and it would be a great response to encouraging people to return.
You know, a recent example, at Christmas time, our bishop did these sort of public service announcements on the radio, on on Dallas radio, and I heard more comments from people about, hey, I heard the bishop wishing everybody Merry Christmas and praying for us on the radio, and I had more comments about that than I have about any of online masses that we've done, and they were excited about that. So people listen to those things.
Well, I think great things can happen sometimes when the sacred and the secular seem to collide. Uh, but that's a real positive. Uh, and maybe we need some public service announcements locally on your parish websites. I went back and there was a great homily, and just something that's really short and but unique, and a real positive comment on someone's experience. We took our whole family. We sat next to the blah 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 family, and gosh, we haven't seen them in a year. And end of public service announcement on your parish website. And I'm pulling these examples really out of my religious imagination, but I think that there is enough giftedness in parishes and church communities that they can figure this out and really make some do something that that will be positive and impactful. Father Russ, we have a slide that has a piece of chocolate cake on it. And cheese and crackers. Although I don't want you to leave and take a break, I think we probably need to segue and see if we can respond to some questions that we've had, and maybe some suggestions as well. Let's see. Here's a question about do you see online masses being used as a convenience for people? How do you think the length of the dispensation has affected getting people back to church? Clearly, online masses are a convenience. They're intended to be a convenience. It's called, I think, the best we can do. And within that, we need to put forward the best online masses that we are able to do with limited means. It's, it's not ABC or CBS or PBS, but the rest of that question has to do with dispensation. How do you think the length of the dispensation has affected getting people back to church? I think I can certainly comment that the longer the dispensation, the more challenging it will be to get Catholics back. Not that they're going to stay away completely, but I think you mentioned when you and I were talking about the habit of going to church. Could you talk just a little bit about that?
Well, I think we get it. We get in the habit of going to mass, and we have lost that. One of the things, and I know this is a convenience. We always set aside a time to go to mass, and we even have our individual communities of, I go to the Saturday evening mass, I go to the 10 o'clock mass, and we have those smaller communities within our large community, but those are gone. And when we put masses online, we stream them live. They're on TV at 11 o'clock or whatever, but if we happen to miss that, it's no big deal. We can click on it later. We can go to Facebook and we can bring it up, or we can go to the diocesan website or the parish website, and we can bring up the mass for that day. And then going further than that, we get into the discipline, where, or not a discipline, but we get into the habit of saying, well, I know what the opening hymn is, and I'm not interested in the opening prayer, and I'm really only interested in the gospel reading. So I'm just going to fast forward to that, and then I'm going to fast forward from there to the homily, and then I'm going to fast forward, and so a mass that would take an hour, we are sort of fast forwarding through and getting the mass done in 15 or 20 minutes at our convenience. And so we lose the discipline of setting aside a time to give to God, that same time every week, or at least 1 hour every week. And so it's a dangerous area that we're walking into when we sort of perpetuate the online mass thing. I'm all for. There's no good answer to that, because you want the mass to be accessible.
Right.
And if a person truly can't watch it on Channel 4 or Channel 27 at 11 o'clock on Sunday or at noon on Sunday, it's great that it's available to them later in the day or even later in the week. But we lose that discipline of this is the time, the 1 hour or the 2 hours, whatever, that we give to God this week in worship.
And perhaps that we've never really revisited the commandment, but the notion that being Catholic includes the celebration of Sunday, whether we do it at 5 o'clock on Saturday or 8:30 on Sunday night with the campus ministry. Being Catholic includes the celebration of Sunday. It's not negotiable. I don't think that's a difficult truth. I think it's a truth that we haven't really taken the time, and maybe that's sort of a reverse positive for during the pandemic. We have not taken the time until the pandemic rolled through that to consider the fact that that's it's a serious and life-giving part of being a Catholic. And I think I haven't heard very many homilies about grace, but grace, and this is on our vocabulary list, and I kind of challenge all our participants to think about it a little bit. There isn't any one definition for grace, but it's God's communication of God's personal self to us. We don't have to merit that. We can receive it openly, and grace really supports our human nature. We don't realize that. We don't account for that a lot of the time, but it's the foundation for understanding Christian life and spirituality. So that said, that human action is in response to grace constitutes faith. That's not hard to understand. Human action in response to God's grace constitutes faith. I don't know how many people really think about the fact that we need grace, but it's just there for the taking. And yes, we can receive grace through a sacramental. We're reminded of our relationship in Jesus Christ when we get palms or ashes. Lent is coming. But to receive the Eucharist, to receive a sacrament in the context of Mass, that's just pure grace. And again, we don't have to merit it. The God that we know says, here it is. Here it is. Try to recognize it in your life. That's the challenge. So
we had a comment about marketing, and this person said marketing can only happen when the surge is over. Otherwise, people would be feel pressured into coming back to Mass. I think marketing, when it happens, needs to be gentle. We don't want to guilt anyone into coming to Mass before it's safe. Well, we don't want to guilt anyone. People should come to Mass because they want to come to Mass, not out of guilt. Although I know that that's probably a traditional Catholic notion of coming to Mass out of guilt, but it's not how it's supposed to be.
Right.
And so marketing shouldn't look like the churches are open now, go to Mass. The marketing should be welcome back. This is your faith, and then another question asked about the beauty of the Mass, and should the online liturgies, should the recording be ornate like in a cathedral recording or simple like in a chapel? And my answer is that Mass is not a performance. Mass is worship. And so in that sense, it should be simple. And you can have something that's simple and beautiful in a cathedral setting, in a very formal setting, or an informal setting. It's not about what's the performance value of it. It's what is the worship value of it. And that comes in the words and in the beauty of the music and the beauty of the whole liturgy, and not just the music. And so it involves, as we started this whole conversation, it involves the participation of all those in attendance, even if they're attending just online. If there's no participation on your part when you're watching it online, it's going to severely impact what you get back out of it.
You know, I'm looking at another question that goes like this. When Jesus healed a man on the Sabbath, he prioritized life over rituals. Now, he prioritized life over a Jewish ritual that he felt was empty. How should we observe that? That was my clarification. How should we observe this passage during the pandemic and Mass? In other words, if I understand this correctly, how should we get ourselves to church to pray as a priority, considering there's a pandemic? Clearly we can't. Clearly we can't prioritize Catholic, we can't prioritize the Eucharistic action. We can try, because as you said, Father Russ, some parishes, some churches, many churches are open. They're just not fully open. And we continue to emphasize fully open is where we're going. We'll get there. And it is not too soon to start planning for that. But at this point, we can't prioritize rituals and ritual action over the safety of our people, whether they're young adults or youth or over 60 or over whatever age the CDC considers you a veteran in the American culture. So we can't actually do any healing of people on the Sabbath to sort of draw a parallel to that question. We can't do it yet. If that's the goal, we can't do it yet completely. But some people could probably go back and taste and see, given the fact that you've talked about the safety that really is happening in our churches. And I think people could, it's, as you say, go somewhere, even if you can't go to your own parish or you're not feeling confident. Go somewhere and try it. I think we have to have, well, faith and trust, coupled with this hope that there will be an end to this. I'm looking. Go ahead, please.
Well, regarding putting ritual ahead of life, I don't think anybody's doing that, nor do we want to do that. I mean, the church, it's still, I guess, a requirement, if you will. We're still called to attend Mass every Sunday. And if we were indeed putting life ahead, ritual ahead of life, our bishops wouldn't have given us a dispensation from it. So I think, the very fact that we have a dispensation from the bishop says that your life is more important to us than having you sit in the pew, and you need to decide when it's right. But there will come a time when it is indeed safe, when we are past this pandemic. I mean, I know that some people say this is our new normal, and personally, I don't accept that this is our new normal. I think I want to get back to close to our old normal. And I think a time is coming in the not too distant future, where we can safely attend, where we reach an acceptable part. I don't want to sound like Dr. Fauci here or anything, but where we achieve herd immunity, where the vaccine is widely available and effective, and where we'll get to a point where the bishops can say, hey, this has been a rough road, but we made it through here just by the grace of God. And now it's time to lift that dispensation and call you back to the church. That's not being ritualistic. It's not being uh, clerical. It's being a good shepherd and worrying about the safety of your flock, not just their physical health, but their spiritual health as well. And I think our bishop here in Dallas is very good at that. I know that that's his utmost concern is being a good shepherd.
Father Russ, we have another, we have a question about encouragement that we, and hopefully you and I and everyone else who calls themselves Catholic, and Christians as well, I should say that, we need to affect people's spirituality. Clearly, the online masses touch spirituality if people are open to the possibility of being touched. It a re, So to have a relationship with God, to have a spirituality, really has to do with uh, a desire to have that union in prayer, a desire to have a union in God, and then to act on that desire. Even if it can be momentary, it can be, I believe, through Mass and the sacraments, through reconciliation. Certainly, when we baptize anyone into the Catholic faith, that's the beginning of that relationship. It's in and it that conversation grows as and a person matures, at least, especially when you talk about starting out with infant baptism, but any baptism, as you say, you weren't necessarily baptized Catholic, but your relationship it grows as you say, um, uh, the life and death and resurrection of Jesus has a meaning for me, and you act on that impulse to have that relationship with God. Um, I I think that you can certainly have an active spirituality in uh, uh, any faith that you would choose, um, because it's grounded in relationship, and it not necessarily physical, but to receive God's self-communication and uh, to nurture that is the job of a Catholic Christian. So uh, I'm sure you've got probably a more sophisticated comment as far as what it means to have a relationship with God. But why don't you jump in on that too, and hopefully we can make a difference in and clarify somebody's thinking.
Well, I think what you say is right. Spirituality can take a lot of different roads. Having a relationship with God can take a lot of different roads. But in the Catholic faith, and really, I would say in all Christian faiths, when we look at the Gospel of John, it tells us what our relationship with God looks like. It tells us what eternal life looks like, and it tells us how we can inherit that. And Jesus tells us, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you do not have life within you. And we get the opportunity to do that every day, every week. And that's why it's so important to do that. It's not just um, it's not because we want you to come drop off your envelopes. It's not because we want you to just see your smiling face. We want to share this meal with you. We want to share with you the promise of eternal life. Um, I used to tell my kids, my job as a dad is to to get to heaven and to make sure you get there too. and um, as a pastor, our job is to look out on our flock and to say, my job is to get to heaven and is take as many as possible of you with me. And so that's it's sort of why we push these things. Somebody had made a comment that on the dispensation, and it said before we had the dispensation, people were coming to church sick, like, I mean, every year with the flu or a bad cold or something, because they were afraid they were trying to avoid sin. And I know in the confessional sometimes I'll have somebody say, well, I missed mass on Saturday, and I'll ask them, why did you miss mass? And they said, well, because I was sick, or because I was caring for my sick husband. I'm like, that is not a sin. you know,
Thank you, Father.
there's no culpability there. You didn't say, uh, I could go to mass today, but I'm not gonna go because I don't feel like it. The reason you didn't go to mass is to protect your brothers and sisters, and you do that not out of sin and not out of willfulness, but you do that to protect your brothers and sisters and to show love for them. So that's the dispensation sort of, I guess, gives formal approval to that. But there are extenuating circumstances why people miss mass, and it doesn't necessarily put them in a state of mortal sin, and we need to remember that.
I have another question. What other things should Catholics do during the week if they're afraid of being in public places? Well, uh, I think the question is what other things to develop maybe spirituality or to remind ourselves that we're Catholic. What other things should Catholics do during the week? Maybe this is too easy, but as a parent, I from time to time take the privilege of reminding my adult children that it's especially when they say, how am I going to get to heaven? How am I going to get to heaven? How's this going to happen? I said, you just need to be Jesus Christ to your children and your spouses and to each other. And to the people in the workplace and to the people in the grocery store. Um, that might seem naive, but I believe that is, pardon the expression, the gospel truth. That's what we're asked to do, is to be Jesus Christ to one another. And it's enormously difficult some days of the year or the week or the month. But uh, again, think about uh, a woman, let me put it this way, a woman who is an acquaintance uh, happens to be Catholic, and she has worked in the same insurance office for about 25 years. She's good at what she does. Um, uh, she is an observant Catholic. She goes to mass. She does what the Catholic faith requires of her, what the religion and the practice of being Catholic requires of her. She two people who she works with, she reflected to me the other day, she said, I had no idea they were Catholic. They knew I was Catholic. And I said, how did they know you were Catholic? Did you talk about your faith? Did you talk about religion? No. But she said, I got a compliment about 6 months ago that, and the compliment was, you're such a nice person. You're such a good person. You're such a helpful person. Are you Catholic? You must be Catholic. And that's an extension of being Jesus Christ to one another. And she said, I had no idea that these other two people I worked with were Catholics. So it doesn't hurt to extend how we practice being Catholic to the workplace. It's one thing to work at the diocese or at a parish, but I think it's something else to go out into the world and forgive me, but they'll know we're Christians by our love. It really is true, and
Other
it's
things people can do during the week or anytime is there are lots of resources out there other than online masses. I mean, if online mass feeds you, that's a good thing. Um, there are, I know several people that are involved in um, a Bible study, going through the Bible in a year with Father Mike Schmitz on from Ascension Press. It's free online. But there are lots of devotionals at formed.org, which most parishes are members of.
right.
Um, um, there are Word on Fire with Bishop Barron and daily reflections there, daily reflections from Franciscan Media. If you just Google Catholic daily reflection, you will get an assortment of things that will help build your Catholic faith. Um, they don't necessarily have to be Catholic. I just finished. I meet with a group on Sunday nights online, and we just finished studying Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and it's pretty deep. It was a wonderful study on community by somebody who's a Protestant theologian, although very close to being Catholic, I have to say. But it was. So there are lots of things you can do to build your spirituality, to build your relationship with Christ, and none of them are a substitute for community. and
Amen.
and being in, because as you mentioned, Dr. Hughes, being Christ to each other, that's how we share Christ's love. That's where people see the love of Christ, is in our relationship with each other. So one of the things we do here at the parish is we have adult Bible studies online. They had been meeting in person before the pandemic, and when we told them they couldn't meet in person anymore, they said, can we figure out how to do this online? And we were still kind of feeling our way through the whole Zoom world and Skype world and all that. But they meet regularly. RCIA meets regularly every week online through Zoom. So uh, when I say, when I kind of slam technology sometimes as not being adequate, it's all we have. and
Almost all we have.
well, almost all we have. But I mean, as far as meeting together in groups, it's been better than not meeting at all. And so yeah, there are lots of, if you're still, if you have folks that are still afraid to get out there, there are lots of options. One thing the pandemic has done is to made those options better than ever.
Well, and at this point, I think I want to remind all of our participants that Pope Francis told us and continues to tell us that the church grows not by forced conversion, but by attraction. And I think there's some merit to talk about the theology of attraction. Where is God in all of this? Has sacramental theology changed because of the pandemic? No, it hasn't changed. This sacramental attraction appears again and again in the writings of Pope Francis, and he speaks of a God who attracts and a church with a message that attracts. And I think a reasonable starting point in any conversation, whether it's spouse to spouse or youth to young adult or young adult to older adult. For example, I think the logical question is, what attracts you to the Catholic faith? What attracts you to the celebration of the Eucharist? And I think that in the end will nurture faith, and I also think that it will make a huge difference in how we get back to being community and to reforming and renewing community. At this point, I know we have to watch our time. I sincerely want to thank all of our participants tonight. I recognize many names, and we appreciate your love and your trust and your kindness in being part of this. Hopefully you'll keep the conversation going. Father Russ, do you have any I would say last words, but final thoughts?
I would just encourage people who are on this call and who haven't checked out their parish to stop by. Our churches are open, not just for Mass, but I think most parishes are open during the day when you can go in there by yourself and pray. Go take a look around. And I know a few months ago I had a lady come into the church, and she said, "I just really miss this place." And I said, "We never locked the doors." You know, we stopped having public masses, but we never locked the doors. And I guess another answer to what do we do during the week? Jesus is always present in that tabernacle, whether he's exposed in the monstrance for exposition or adoration. Jesus is always in that tabernacle. And if the best you can do is to come in there and spend some time by yourself with Jesus in the church, that's an awesome thing. That's an awesome thing. And I would encourage you to do that, or to encourage others to do that. If they're afraid of being around other people, go when you can be alone. That's
Good idea.
Yep. So we, like I said, we didn't lock our doors, and whether we have a sign out front, whether we have a public mass or whatever, the church is not, it's not my house. It's your house. It's your home. And you should feel welcome there anytime.
I think you can tell that Father Russ and I are restless in a good way, bold and optimistic at this point that we'll be fully open, and that people will return when we welcome them, and they'll return to feast on the sacrament of the Eucharist and be fed from the liturgy of the Word. And Father Russ also mentioned in an earlier conversation that we can't forget that online things have been going on besides masses. Particularly a huge thanks to the deacons who have been introducing and leading the liturgy of the Word. and morning and evening prayer, beautiful things that are part of our Catholic heritage. And so all these reflections come with a challenge. If we reclaim our identity as authentically worshiping Catholics, made in the likeness of a relational God, then by returning to our churches when we can safely do it, we can certainly experience the joy of becoming what we eat. Thank you to Dr. Ted Wapham, who invited us to this conversation, to Oscar Carranza, who has been a great and helpful assistant, to Joseph, your last name, Bionnier, who has really been mission control for us. You won't see Joseph, but he's a graduate assistant at the University of Dallas. And certainly to Dr. Jody Hunt, who has been lovely, and especially a virtual affirmation and hug for my conversation partner, Father Russ Mower. He said yes without hesitation when invited, and hopefully we can move boldly back to the old normal and authentic worship sooner than you think. So thank you to all of you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. We'd like to thank everyone, especially our speakers, Dr. Hughes and Father Mower, for joining our conversations this evening on Zoom and Facebook Live. We will send out an email with the survey link and access to the virtual workshop once it is uploaded. In addition, there will be a survey that will come out, so please keep your eyes on that. On our next conversation, it will be on reading the Bible at home. It will be happening on February 8th. That is my father's birthday. It's a great day. February 8th at 7 p.m. So reading the Bible at home on February 8th at 7 p.m. Again, thank you so much for all who attended, your time, especially again to Dr. Hughes and Father Mower. We greatly appreciate you gathering. And I learned a great deal. And it was great just to come in as a student instead of teacher this evening. And I'm sure many of our colleagues and lay ministers could agree with me on that. We look forward to seeing you all next month. And thank you for your time.
Good night.